ultimately, what led to, and I believe the last death toll is 79 people. It might be more at this point. Truly horrific fire. What was the ultimate origin of the policy choices of the UK government to not install a sprinkler system in that piece of public housing, as an example? To put things on the side of the building, which apparently improved how the building looked, but actually made it even more flammable. What was the origin point of those grotesque pieces of decision-making and the expendability of these people's lives? Neoliberalism, austerity. And so this is a really interesting exchange with Chris Williamson, who's a member of Parliament for North Derby, on the Morning Politics, BBC Daily Politics show with Joe Coburn. Let's have a listen.
Your shadow business secretary tweeted, "Burn neoliberalism, not people." Is that appropriate?
This is a class issue, and neoliberalism is at fault here. Absolutely.
Right. So you agree with Clive Lewis?
Well, I retweeted his tweet.
Oh, right. Well, you do then.
Well, I do agree, because yes, neoliberalism is the problem, and it's a long-standing problem going back 40 years, and it's got far worse in this last 7 years. This culture, which you've already you've spoken about cutting red tape. I used to work in the building trade. I know how important health and safety is. I nearly died on a building site because there was no handrail and I fell 20 feet onto a concrete staircase. But the Conservative Party want to get rid of health and safety regulations because they see it as it fetters business. But worse than that, it's this point where they will externalise wherever they can, privatise wherever they can.
Let's talk about
that. To penny pinch and to use public services to make money for their friends.
That's exactly right. And, I remember a friend of mine was telling me that John Prescott, who's a former deputy prime minister under Tony Blair, but he kind of represented, at least, not really policy-wise, not particularly great or interesting guy, but he was old Labour, and he worked his way up. He was a self-made guy. He wasn't, that there's more of those clear divisions in UK politics. And as a young man, he had been a server on a restaurant car, I think on a train. And when he would rise in Parliament, the Tories would all yell drink orders at him, which is what their politics are, and that's who they are. And I think a lot of Tories, when they hear that clip, their big takeaway will just be like, you used to be in the building trade, loser. I inherited millions of pounds from my family's slave trading estates in the Indies in Africa.
I love that he uses Twitter as an affirmative. Like, yes, I do believe that. Because with the Republicans, we always see, oh, that was on Twitter, that was this. It's like, yes, I did retweet that tweet.
That was really funny. I retweeted it. Hey, did you support the president calling a kid a retard at a Special Olympics rally? Well, I think he's still getting used to being president, and I don't really pay attention to Twitter. Anyways, we got to get some food out of kids' mouths. Here is visually it speaks for itself, but you can hear this. I do want to play this too, and I would encourage listeners to look this up and just hear it. This is video from BBC Panorama when fire trucks basically first came upon the Grenfell Tower, and these are firefighters seeing the blaze for the first time. Obviously remember, these are professionals. I mean, this is what they do for a living. They're utterly terrified and shocked at what they're seeing with this Grenfell Tower.
Jesus Christ. Oh my God, there's kids in there. That's a real bluff. Oh,
Well, it's towering inferno, isn't it?
how is that possible?
It's jumped up all the way along the flats. Look.
How the is that even possible?
How was that happening?
That fire should represent everything Republicans want to do to this country, everything they have been doing, everything Tories have done to the UK. It's the natural outgrowth that certain lives are totally expendable just to trim a little bit more off for those who already have so many. It's grotesque.
Friend of the show, Corey Pine, called that the sort of triangle shirtwaist, but for housing on Twitter. And I think that's exactly what sort of, I think people have a responsibility to make sure this sort of thing stops from happening.
And when Matt Iglesias, rightly, every time something like this happens, people point out a really disgusting thing he wrote about, I think, a fire in Bangladesh factory. It was a fire, I believe, right?
Earthquake, I think?
Or something where many Bangladeshi workers at a factory died because of no safety precautions in a sweatshop in Bangladesh that serviced all sorts of Western multinationals. And Matt Iglesias came out with this sort of, aggressive nerd hot take of like, well, they shouldn't have the same safety regulations we do because they're Bangladesh, which is obviously a very, at the very least, inhuman response to that.
And he acknowledges that as a bad take.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, he rightfully gets called out for it, but at least, he's actually moved on morally. I mentioned Megan McArdle earlier. I mean, she wrote a literally unreadable piece about how, sprinkler systems seem like a good idea, but you never know when you're spending other people's money. And hey, like if you speed to work, you might kill somebody, but you still got to get to work, and cost and benefits.
Should we have sprinkler systems? Well, let's consider what the trade-offs of raising the speed limit or lowering it 5 miles per hour is.
Right. Should you get out of bed in the morning? I mean, it's just, it's just this sort of, it's very interesting that Republican and conservative thinking is always best and most clearly represented when it's aggressive stupidity. And their versions of quote-unquote intellectuals are just obfuscation, nonsense, thought experiments, and misdirection. You really want to know what they think, you probably could find some, Reddit threads about, hey, I don't care, it was immigrants and Muslims who got killed in Grenfell. There you go. Be a much more accurate pulse on where those people are coming from. Or they just don't care. Whatever the equivalent of Paul Ryan is in the UK. Just like, oh, this is such a shame. We still need to totally gut housing. Actually, Paul Ryan would say, like, of course I don't want fires to happen in public housing. All those people should be homeless anyway. Why did we even invest in having any public provision for them to begin with, let alone a sprinkler system? They should be freezing on the street.
Well, sprinkler system aside, it was the structure that they built all the way up the building that actually...
cladding.
Yeah, the cladding. That was the thing that they put on the side to make it look better. Right.
And so now the last thing that I've read is that Theresa May has said that there are people going around and inspecting similar cladding. It's like, take it down. Just take it all down.
Whoa, not so fast.
Right. They've discovered that
just because my poll numbers are low doesn't mean all of a sudden I think Bangladeshis are human.
But they've discovered that most of it is highly flammable. Like, start taking it down. I mean, I don't know.
Well, it's easy to say that, but if you think about
how many people are going to get hurt taking that cladding
exactly
down,
how many people? There's the next Megan McArdle article.
I was also, I mean, I don't know anything about building construction really, but I was under the impression that in order, the basic safety things, like that a building was sectioned off, and when you build something, it's sectioned off in such a way that the fire can't spread like that.
This was built prior to a lot of those regulations.
Yeah, this was built. Yeah.
That's why. I had the same reaction as a firefighter, which now I feel a little bit less dumb. I was like, how can that even happen? I mean, I don't understand.
It's not regulation. And think about whatever they have in mind in Ben Carson's HUD department every time you see that fire. Think about that. That's the agenda.
And it's a complete disservice to firefighters to put them in make situations where you put them in that.
Well, that's another group of working people whose lives are expendable. I mean, don't forget Republicans fought for years to make sure that first responders on 9/11 didn't get proper health payout benefits after they got sick saving people's lives after a terrorist attack, which is supposed to be like, we'll use a firefighter for every campaign ad imaginable, but making sure that their sickness is treated, fuck that.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos